as much as I've found it frustrating for years, there is still, even now, unbelievably, a lot of lazy punditry, a lot of lazy assuming out there in the press that our two major parties in this country are basically the same, that they're mirror images of each other. The actual news from the actual world is here to disprove that most days, particularly today, though. I mean, today, you know, Congress just narrowly averted a government shutdown this weekend, right? Today, Congress was consumed with drama over whether the farthest right faction in the Republican Party will be successful in their efforts to oust the Republican Speaker of the House. Why do they want to oust him as Speaker of the House? Because he had the temerity to work with Democrats on a bill that kept the government from shutting down. That is kind of their sum total of their argument against him. I mean, for them, it is self-evident that grave crime is enough. If House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is going to commit the mortal sin of working with the Democrats on anything, then obviously he must lose his job. He can no longer be a Republican Speaker of the House. And that is, I mean, that's what today was consumed with in Congress. That is now what Congress is going to be about for at least the rest of this week and maybe longer. Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz, tonight actually filed his motion to vacate, which means within 2 legislative days, members of the House will have to take up the future of McCarthy's speakership, thanks to Gaetz's objection that McCarthy had the temerity to work with Democrats. And nobody knows exactly whether this is going to work, whether Democrats are going to help Kevin McCarthy stay in power, what they might demand as their price if they choose to do that. We also don't know how Republicans will line up for and against Kevin McCarthy. Fox News is now reporting that some Republicans who like Kevin McCarthy might try to end run this whole thing by trying to expel Matt Gaetz from Congress altogether. That should make for some happy, fun times. But bottom line, whether or not Republicans succeed in ousting their own Speaker of the House over this narrow miss on a government shutdown, whether or not it ultimately ousts him from the speakership, the message here is clear, right? I mean, in the Republican Party, if you work with Democrats on anything, you are in big trouble as a Republican. That is where the Republican Party is at right now. Meanwhile, here's how the Democratic president is campaigning for re-election.
There was a time in America when we expected leaders to put people over politics. When instead of shouting, people from different parties talked and listened. But for Joe Biden, compromise isn't a way of the past. It's how he's building America's future, passing hundreds of bipartisan laws, a law to rebuild our roads and bridges that puts Americans to work, to make America a leader in high-tech manufacturing, bringing good jobs home, laws to improve veterans' health care and strengthen gun safety. Every one of those laws bipartisan. He hasn't gotten everything he wants, but that's not how he measures success. For Joe Biden, success means lifting everyone in America, no matter where you live or who you voted for, because he is a president for all Americans.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
He hasn't gotten everything he wanted, but that's not how he defines success. Now, for true blue liberals and real Democratic partisans who are watching that ad, you may object to that strategy, right? And some of that imagery in particular can be hard to swallow. You know, Condoleezza Rice and Reagan and even John McCain, right? But that's Joe Biden, right? President Biden has always been a very collegial guy, both with his Democratic colleagues and also with Republicans. It is a core part of how he works as a politician and therefore of what people expect from him in politics. Yes, he is a liberal. Yes, he is a progressive on almost all policy issues, but he will work with everyone. He'll always try to find middle ground. That's Joe Biden. He has been doing this literally for decades. It is not a surprise that this is how he works, and this is now how he is campaigning for re-election. Democrats are campaigning for office by saying, I'll compromise and find middle ground. Republicans are run out of their party for even thinking about that, let alone doing it. There is no way to both sides this. There is no mirror image here. One of these things is not like the other. The two parties are working on two different projects. And the reasons for that are myriad. But here's another piece of it that we are just learning. NBC News has just broken a news story tonight, a very provocative story within the last hour that may give us a little bit of a window into why the two sides, the two major political parties in the United States right now, seem like they are coming from two different planets. And they are trying to do two totally different things. It may have a little bit to do with the relationship between the fringe, the extreme, and the middle. The distance between the, not just not governing, but really far out there, sort of non-respectable fringe and the actual governing part of the party. Here's a story. About 25 years ago, 1997, the flagship conservative magazine, the National Review, went through one of its periodic purges. They realized, as they periodically do, that they were employing some writers, they were publishing some pieces that were just too racist. They have periodically realized this over the course of the history of this magazine. They have to do this when they have ended up publishing people who claimed that, white people are naturally more intelligent than everybody else, that white people are genetically superior to all other races. They were publishing a guy who argued that white parents and Asian parents should teach their children to avoid black people. They published a guy who argued that America was in the midst of a genocide of white people because of non-white immigrants coming into America. The National Review periodically has had to do these kinds of purges, but the one they did in 1997 resulted in a new home being founded, effectively for people like that who the National Review has to fire. In 1999, an organization was set up called VDARE. And VDARE, they say, stands for the name Virginia Dare, who they say was supposedly the first white child born in colonial America. You can see where this is going, right? The founder of VDARE, one of these guys who got fired from the National Review for his whites-only immigration stuff, he founded VDARE, basically set it up as an online hub for people to advance academic-sounding and political-sounding racism. And I don't mean that in a vague kind of way. I mean it really specifically. The founder of VDARE calls himself a racial nationalist. What does that mean? It means in this nation, it should just be the one race. He said the Obama administration was a minority occupation government, meaning it was not an American government, but it was a minority occupation by some foreign entity. He also says, and forgive me for even quoting this, but he says that Hispanics, quote, specialize in rape. He says the United States, quote, is a white nation. So this is stuff that's like off the edge, right? Or at least it used to be. In 2018, CNN reported that a speechwriter in the Trump White House had spoken at a white nationalist conference and done a panel with the founder of VDARE just a few days before Election Day in 2016. And when that news came out in CNN, that speechwriter was fired from the Trump White House. But these guys have to land somewhere, right? Turns out that guy, who went straight from appearing with the VDARE guy at the white nationalist event the week of the 2016 election, he went, straight from there to a job working in the Trump White House as a speechwriter thereafter. When he was fired from even the Trump White House, he first briefly landed a new speechwriter job with Congressman Matt Gaetz, who just tonight has filed this motion to vacate to remove Republican Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy from his job for the capital crime of working with Democrats to keep the government open. So this guy, fired from the Trump White House, briefly lands as a speechwriter with Matt Gaetz. Then he lands at a website, a right-wing website that, among other things, pushes the conspiracy theory that there wasn't really an attack on the U.S. Capitol by a Trump-supporting mob on January 6, 2021. That was actually an FBI operation with FBI agents and informants and operators just pretending to be Trump supporters because deep state, flat earth, QAnon, whatever. Well, now NBC News reports just within the last hour that it is that guy's far-right website that appears to have published the blueprint for right-wing billionaire Elon Musk to buy the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, to take it private, and then to basically kill it off as a means of helping the far right and hurting the United States of America. The article called it a, quote, declaration of war against the globalist American empire. So that's how things are going on the right. Right? In the Democratic Party, it's former President Jimmy Carter in hospice, turning 99. He may yet eradicate guinea worm infection from the face of the earth before he goes, as part of his legacy of good works and practical post-presidency decency and leadership. We've got the current Democratic president running for re-election by showcasing how much he wants to work with Democrats and Republicans and how much it's okay to compromise and not get everything you want as long as you bring people together, and he's committed to that. On the right, it's a, what's the phrase? A declaration of war against the globalist American empire. Shaping the media landscape in America. And a former president indicted on 91 felonies and spending his days now trying to sick his supporters on the judges and prosecutors who are confronting him in court. Both sidesism about our two major political parties has really never been warranted in this country in modern times, not in my lifetime. Right now, it is not just unwarranted, it is malpractice. One of these things is not at all like the other.